Two children behind iron bars cried out for a mother who would never return. A stranger's heart broke as he watched their small hands reach through cold metal. One choice would change 3 lives forever. But some cages are harder to escape than others, and some strangers carry secrets darker than silence. The sound cut through the morning air like a prayer no one wanted to hear. Samuel Briggs froze outside Widow Morrison's boarding house, coffee cup halfway to his lips. The cry came again, softer this time, desperate, and Sam's chest clenched in recognition. He made that same broken plea once, 20 years ago. In the back courtyard, the twins pressed their faces to the makeshift cage Morrison had built, tiny fingers curling around rusted iron. They couldn't have been more than 4 or 5. The boy's dark hair stuck up in stubborn cowlicks, his eyes the color of storm clouds. His sister mirrored him in every way except for the small scar above her brow, catching the light whenever she moved. Their clothes didn't fit, cast-offs patched with whatever Morrison could spare. "Mama's coming," the girl whispered, though her voice trembled under the weight of doubt no child should carry. She promised. The boy nodded, lower lip trembling. He swiped at his nose with a sleeve already stiff with tears and snot. Sam felt the hopelessness radiating from him, heavy enough to make grown men look away. Widow Morrison stepped onto the porch, wiping her hands on a stained apron. A woman of sharp bones and sharper words, she snapped, "You two quit that hollering. Your mama ain't coming. Sooner you accept it, the easier it'll be for everyone." The words landed like a blow. The girl turned her face away to hide her tears. The boy just stared at Morrison with storm-dark eyes already learning that promises broke and people vanished. Sam set his coffee on a fence post and stepped closer. "Morning, Mrs. Morrison." His voice was rougher than he intended. The twins looked up at him with the cautious hope of strays who'd been kicked too often but still believed in kindness. Morrison's mouth twisted. "Mr. Briggs, didn't expect to see you about this early." She gestured toward the cage. "Sorry for the racket. Their mama dropped him 3 weeks back, said she'd return in a few days. Haven't seen her since." Sam's jaw tightened. The children clung to every word. "Where do they sleep?" "Eat. They got blankets," Morrison said with a shrug. "I bring scraps when I remember. It's temporary anyway. Soon as I find someone to take them off my hands, they'll be gone. Can't feed 2 extra mouths on charity." Her casual cruelty made Sam's fists clench. The twins huddled together, whispering to each other like the only safe place left in the world was inside their shared silence. "What are their names?" he asked before he knew why. "Lucy and Thomas, or the other way around." Morrison waved dismissively. "They hardly speak, except for crying after their mama." Then, with a calculating gleam, "You interested in taking them? I'd make it worth your while. Say $20 for the pair." Sam's throat went dry. $20, as if they were livestock at auction. He looked at the twins. Lucy tilted her head, eyes locked on his, and Sam swore she could see into the empty places in him he tried to bury. "I don't know anything about raising children," he murmured. But the words rang false. He knew what it was to be small, abandoned, hungry for someone to stay. Morrison pressed. "They're good children. Quiet, helpful. Smart enough. Of course, if you're not interested, the state's sending someone next week. Ship him off east to one of those institutions." Sam's blood chilled. He'd heard the stories. Rows of beds, children taught not to cry, future shut behind boarded windows. The thought of Lucy and Thomas swallowed into that darkness made him sick. 15, he said, the number slipping out before he could stop it. Morrison's brow arched, but she already knew she had him. 20. Final offer. "These are quality children, Mr. Briggs." Sam wanted to spit at the words. But the twins were watching, their eyes lit with fragile hope. Thomas gripped the bars so hard his knuckles went white. Lucy whispered something, prayer or promise. "Fine," Sam ground out. 20. "But I take them now." Morrison smiled, thin and snake-like. "Pleasure doing business. I'll fetch their things." When she disappeared inside, Sam knelt before the cage. The twins studied him, silent and wide-eyed. "Are you really taking us away?" Lucy asked. Thomas nodded beside her, his eyes bright with desperate hope. Sam swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said softly. "I'm taking you home. The word felt strange on his tongue, but looking at their faces, he realized maybe home wasn't a place. Maybe it was people who chose to stay. Morrison returned with a bundle of belongings and a rusty key. The lock gave way with a squeal like freedom. Lucy stepped out first, Thomas close behind. They stood together, shoulders touching, staring up at Sam like he was something miraculous. He held out his hands. After a beat, they each took one. Small fingers, cold and sticky, clung to him with a grip that said they couldn't risk letting go. "Come on," Sam said, his voice thick. "Let's go home." As they left the boarding house behind, the twins kept glancing over their shoulders, afraid of being dragged back. But the further they walked, the lighter their steps became, until by the edge of town, they were almost skipping. Sam's cabin stood at the end of a dirt road, cradled by pines. Small, solid, and built by his own hands, it had always been enough for one man trying to outrun the past. Now, seen through the eyes of children who had spent weeks in a cage, it was paradise. At the doorway, Lucy clutched Thomas's hand, both frozen as though afraid to step into something too good to last. "Go on," Sam said gently. "It's yours now, too." They crossed the threshold like pilgrims entering a sacred place, moving carefully, reverently, amazed at the simple wonders. Books on the shelf, smooth stones of the fireplace, the sound of their shoes on clean floorboards. And for the first time in years, Sam's lonely cabin felt less like a refuge for one broken man, and more like the beginning of a home. "Are those real books?" Lucy whispered, the kind of whisper children use for candy or Christmas mornings. Sam nodded. Her face changed the way sunrise changes a room, suddenly bright, as if he'd told her she could fly. "Mama used to read to us," she said. Then the smile slid away the moment she felt it coming. Sam felt something cold settle in his gut. What kind of things did she forget? He asked as casually as he could, but Lucy was already distracted by the sight of plates on the shelf. Real plates, not the dented tin they'd been used to. Thomas tugged Sam's sleeve. His storm cloud eyes were too old for his face. They held a seriousness that made Sam ache. "Mama forgot our names sometimes," he said quietly, careful as if he might break something. "She forgot where we lived. She forgot she promised to come back." His lower lip trembled, then set hard in a stubborn line. The same line Sam remembered wearing at that age, a vow to not cry, because crying changed nothing. Lucy shot him a look equal parts warning and protection. "She was just tired," she added fast, like a defense rehearsed 1,000 nights. "Taking care of 2 kids is hard." Mrs. Morrison said Mama needed a rest. The way she excused it broke something in Sam. These children had been let down by the person who should have loved them more than anything, and still they made excuses. Still they pressed their faces to iron and called a name into the wind because hope was the only thread between them and the dark. Sam swallowed the anger that wanted to rise and make a noise. "You don't have to worry about any of that now," he said, steadier than he felt. "You're safe here." The words sounded thin even as he spoke them, a bandage on a deeper wound, but it was what he had. Sometimes that was enough. The twins exchanged one of those quick, wordless conversations only people who share childhood can have. Lucy nodded. Thomas relaxed his grip on her hand. They were giving him permission to try. Sam realized then that they were handing him a title he'd never wanted but couldn't refuse. Adult, guardian, somebody who stayed. "I should show you where you'll sleep," he said, mostly to fill the quiet. The problem announced itself the moment they stepped into his bedroom. One small bed, barely big enough for him, let alone 2 growing children. The twins noticed at once. Lucy's face fell as if she'd remembered a good thing never lasts. "We can sleep on the floor," she offered, bright and quick and practiced. "We don't mind. We slept on the ground when Mama had her tired days. Thomas doesn't kick much, and I don't snore like Papa used to." The name hit Sam like a fist. He hadn't even thought to ask about their father. "Where's your papa?" he asked gently, dreading the answer. Thomas went blank. Lucy wrapped her arms around herself, trying to hold something in. "Papa went to heaven," she said simply, with the automatic acceptance children use when they have no other choice. "Mama said he got sick and couldn't get better." Sam felt the room tilt. Parents dead or gone, 3 weeks behind bars, and the children were offering to sleep on the floor because that's what they thought they deserved. Rage at the world shook his hands. "No one's sleeping on the floor," he said, firm. "We'll figure something out." His head raced through options. Move the bed, build a pallet, fix some spare lumber he knew of. He could make beds. He could do things with his hands. For tonight, he decided, because decisions make the world less frightening, we'll squeeze in. Tomorrow I'll start getting you your own beds. Lucy's eyes widened. Thomas's mouth fell open like Sam had promised the moon. "Really?" she breathed. Sam nodded. Without warning, Lucy threw her arms around him, pressing her face into his shirt like she would memorize the smell of safety. Thomas followed, and soon he was being doubled over by two small, earnest hugs, each child's arms barely reaching around his waist. The weight of them was part terror, part joy, part a responsibility that bent his knees. They looked at him like he had answers he didn't own. Maybe being ready wasn't the point, Sam thought. Maybe showing up was. "Are you hungry?" he asked finally. Their simultaneous nods made him laugh, a small, surprised sound. "Then let's see what we can do for dinner." Food unlocked something. Lucy chattered about tastes she remembered. Thomas explored the kitchen like an archivist cataloging a new world. Together, they found a can of peaches and a little flour. Enough, if he wasn't careless, to make biscuits. Cooking became a small adventure. Lucy stood on a chair to stir with earnest concentration. Thomas set the table like it mattered. For the first time since the morning cry, Sam felt a loose kind of ease. They ate biscuits and peaches and watered-down coffee. Then Lucy's face crumpled. Her fork fell, and tears came like a sudden storm. "What if Mama comes back and we're not here?" she sobbed. "What if Mrs. Morrison tells her we left and she thinks we didn't wait?" Thomas reached for her hand, trying not to break. Sam's heart split open watching their loyalty wrestle with the need to survive. He knelt by Lucy and put a gentle hand on her shoulder. "If your mama comes back," he said softly, "Mrs. Morrison will tell her where you are. She'll be happy. You'll be safe and fed and sleeping in a real bed. But if she can't remember or can't come back for reasons besides not loving you, you'll stay here. With me. As long as you want. As long as you need." The silence afterward was so full Sam could hear his pulse. Their faces lit with a stunned, fragile hope. "You mean it?" Lucy asked. "Both of you," Sam said, each syllable steady. "No matter what." Thomas launched himself into Sam's arms, and Lucy followed. They hugged like the world might unravel if they let go. Sam held them, trying not to think how he could fail them, choosing instead to anchor himself in the moment when everything felt possible. 3 days passed like a dream Sam didn't want to end. The twins arrived like weather changing the landscape. Lucy claimed the bookshelf and ran her fingers along spines she'd never touched before. Thomas made himself Sam's shadow, asking questions with a seriousness that made Sam ache with affection. He learned Lucy hummed when she was content. Thomas was left-handed like Sam had once been. Watching the boy carefully write his name made Sam's eyes sting. They shared everything, food, stories, whispered dreams, because they'd never had enough to be selfish. Home grew around them, small and strange and right. On the fourth morning, Sam woke before dawn to the sound of horses. Not a neighbor's lazy step, but deliberate riders moving without wanting to be heard. He slipped from the bed where all three had slept and peered out. 3 men dismounted at his fence. Even in the dim light, the lead silhouette stopped Sam's breath cold. Marshal Hartley, the man who tracked Sam across state lines for 2 years. The man who knew the truth Sam had run from. Hartley's voice carried clearly. "Remember, we want him alive if possible. The bank wants their money back more than they want his corpse. But if he runs or fights, don't hesitate to put him down." A deputy checked his weapon. "What about the children?" he asked. "What children?" Hartley snapped. Sam exhaled, a small, guilty relief that didn't know. Then the deputy added, "Saw 2 little ones through the window, sleeping in the bed with our man. Looked like twins, both dark-headed." Sam's chest slammed shut. The door was about to open on everything he'd tried to build for a fragile family of 3. There was a pause, and Sam could almost hear Hartley's mind working through the implications. "Changes things," The marshal said at last. Can't have children getting hurt in the crossfire. We'll have to be careful about this. Sam's hands shook as he reached for his gun belt hanging on the bedpost. Behind him, Lucy stirred with a small, confused sound. Both twins sat up, hair mussed from sleep. Thomas rubbing his eyes, Lucy already sharp and watchful, the way a child learns to wake ready for danger. Sam, Lucy whispered, her voice small in the darkness. What's wrong? Her eyes found the gun in his hands, and her face went pale. She knew what that meant. The knowledge was written across her features like scar. Thomas was awake now, too, his storm cloud eyes moving between Sam and the window where the footsteps grew louder. Are the bad men here? He asked, with the flat certainty of someone who'd always known bad men existed, and eventually found everyone. Sam's throat closed. These children trusted him, believed him. For a moment, he hated himself more than Hartley ever could. Listen to me, Sam said urgently, dropping to his knees beside the bed, gripping their small hands in his shaking ones. There are men outside who want to hurt me. Not you. Never you, but me. I need you to be very brave and very quiet while I figure out what to do. Lucy's chin trembled, but she lifted it stubbornly, her mouth set in a line that reminded Sam of himself at her age. We won't let them hurt you, she said fiercely. Thomas nodded, his small jaw set with deadly seriousness. You can't fight men with guns, Sam said gently, his heart breaking at their loyalty. But you can help me by staying safe. Can you do that? They both nodded, though Lucy's eyes glittered with unshed tears and Thomas's grip on her hand turned his knuckles white. A voice boomed from outside, echoing off the canyon walls with practiced authority. Samuel Briggs, we know you're in there. Come out with your hands where we can see them. Sam's blood went cold. Samuel Briggs, Lucy repeated softly, confusion flickering across her face. But your name is Sam. Sam Daniels, you told us. The innocent words struck like a blow. Of course, he'd lied. Lied from the start. Lied for 2 years, ever since he'd fled Montana with a marshal's bullet in his shoulder and the screams of dying men in his ears. Sam Daniels was the name of a man who built beds, who read stories, who tucked children in at night. Samuel Briggs was something else entirely, a man with blood on his hands and choices that couldn't be undone. I'll explain everything later, he promised, though he wasn't sure there would be a later. Right now, I need you both to hide. Under the bed, in the root cellar, anywhere they can't see you. Please. We're not leaving you, Lucy said, fierce and unyielding. Mama left us. Papa left us. You're not leaving us too. Thomas nodded hard beside her, small jaw clenched in stubborn defiance. Outside, Hartley barked again, sharper this time. You've got 60 seconds, Briggs. After that, we're coming in. Sam heard boots on the porch, the groan of wood under heavy steps. 60 seconds to save 2 children from the sins of his past. Please, he whispered, his voice breaking. He cupped their faces, memorizing every freckle, every dark curl, in case this was the last time. If something happens to me, if they take me away, find Sheriff Coleman in town. Tell him Sam Daniels sent you. He's a good man. He'll help you. Lucy's face crumpled, but she nodded through her tears. Thomas was shaking, silent sobs tearing through his small chest, but he followed Lucy as she pulled him from the bed. Like shadows, they slipped into the main room, carrying the bundle Mrs. Morrison had given them. The front door exploded inward, with splintering under a heavy boot. Hartley filled the doorway, gun drawn, his face carved from granite. 2 deputies fanned out behind him with the cool precision of men who'd done this before. Their eyes swept the cabin, sharp and merciless. Samuel Briggs, Hartley said, his voice heavy with 2 years of pursuit. Also known as Sam Daniels. You've led us quite a chase. Sam stepped out of the bedroom, hands raised, body angled to shield where the twins had hidden. Marshal, he said quietly, his voice steadier than he felt. Been a while. Hartley's smile was cold as steel. Not nearly long enough for the families of the men you killed, or for the bank you robbed, or for the law you've been running from. The words fell like funeral tolls. Sam had known this day would come, known it every morning he woke, every night he lay down. You couldn't outrun the past forever. "I never meant for anyone to die," Sam said, the old defense rising unbidden. True then, true now, but truth never comforted the dead or their families. Hartley's expression didn't change. Intent doesn't resurrect corpses, Briggs, and it sure doesn't give back the money you stole. One of the deputies was moving closer to the main room, his eyes scanning the shadows where Sam prayed the twins were hidden well enough to escape notice. "You alone in here?" the deputy asked, his hand resting on his gun butt. "Thought we saw children through the window." Sam's heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. "You saw wrong," he said quickly. "Been living alone for 2 years. Ask anyone in town." But even as he spoke, he could see doubt creeping into the deputy's eyes. The bed behind him was clearly too disturbed for one person, and children had a way of leaving traces that sharp eyes could spot. "Search the place," Hartley ordered, and Sam's world tilted sideways. "Carefully. If there are children here, I want to know who they are and where they came from." The deputies moved with practiced efficiency, one heading for the bedroom, while the other began methodically checking every corner, every shadow, every possible hiding place in the main room. Sam watched helplessly as they drew closer to wherever Lucy and Thomas had concealed themselves. His mind raced through possibilities, creating a distraction, making a break for the door. Anything to draw attention away from 2 children who didn't deserve to be caught in the crossfire of his mistakes. But before he could act, a small voice cut through the tension like a knife through silk. "Don't hurt him." Lucy stepped out from behind the woodpile, where she and Thomas had been hidden, her chin raised in defiance despite the tears streaming down her face. "Please don't hurt Sam. He saved us. He's good." Thomas appeared beside her a moment later, his storm cloud eyes fixed on Hartley with an intensity that seemed far too old for his young face. "He gave us food," Thomas said quietly, "and books, and he said we could stay forever if we wanted to." The silence that followed was deafening. Hartley's eyes moved between the children and Sam with the calculating expression of someone reassessing everything he thought he knew. The deputies had frozen in place, hands still on their weapons, but uncertainty written across their features. "Well," Hartley said slowly, his voice carrying new weight, "this does complicate things." The air in the cabin felt thick enough to cut with a knife. Hartley studied the twins with the sharp attention of a man trying to solve a puzzle that had just gotten infinitely more complicated. Lucy and Thomas stood frozen between the woodpile and the lawman, their small hands clasped together so tightly their knuckles had gone white. Sam could see the fear in their eyes. But underneath it was something else, a fierce protectiveness that made his chest ache with pride and terror in equal measure. "Children," Hartley said finally, his voice gentler than Sam had ever heard it. "What are your names?" Lucy lifted her chin higher, and Sam recognized the stubborn set of her jaw that meant she was about to do something brave and possibly stupid. "Lucy Cooper," she said clearly, "and this is my brother, Thomas. Sam didn't steal us, if that's what you're thinking. He saved us from Mrs. Morrison's cage." One of the deputies raised an eyebrow. "Cage?" he asked, glancing at his partner with an expression that suggested this conversation had just taken an unexpected turn. Thomas nodded solemnly, his voice small but steady as he spoke. "She kept us locked up like animals, said we were too much trouble to let run free. Sam paid $20 to get us out." The words hit the room like stones thrown into still water, creating ripples of discomfort that reached every corner. Sam watched Hartley's face carefully, seeing the moment when the marshal's professional detachment began to crack around the edges. The man was a father himself. Sam remembered suddenly had seen a girapape of Hartley's own daughter tucked inside his vest pocket during their first encounter 2 years ago. $20, Hartley repeated slowly, and there was something in his tone that made Sam's stomach clench with new worry. "You bought these children." The way he said it made it sound like the worst kind of crime, and Sam felt the careful story he'd been building in his mind begin to crumble. "It wasn't like that," Sam said quickly, but even to his own ears, the explanation sounded weak. She was going to send them to an institution. They were scared and hungry, and she had them locked up like prisoners. I couldn't just walk away. "So you purchased them?" Hartley pressed, his marshal's instincts taking over despite the complicated emotions playing across his features. Paid money to acquire custody of 2 children who weren't legally yours to buy. Lucy stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension like a blade. He didn't buy us like things, she said fiercely. He rescued us. There's a difference. The simple declaration carried more weight than any legal argument Sam could have made. Thomas nodded beside his sister, his storm cloud eyes fixed on Hartley with unwavering intensity. Mrs. Morrison was mean to us, he added quietly. Sam is kind. He reads us stories and makes us food and doesn't lock us up when we cry. Sam saw something shift in Hartley's expression, a crack in the professional mask that revealed the man underneath. The marshal looked at these 2 small defenders and seemed to see his own daughter in their fierce loyalty, their desperate need to protect someone who had shown them kindness in a world that had shown them precious little. Where are your parents? Hartley asked gently, crouching down to bring himself closer to the children's eye level. The gesture made him seem less threatening, more human, and Sam felt a flicker of hope that maybe this wouldn't end with bullets and blood after all. Lucy's lower lip trembled, but her voice remained steady. Papa died before we were old enough to remember him proper. Mama brought us to Mrs. Morrison 3 weeks ago and said she'd be back in a few days, but she never came. The words were delivered with the matter-of-fact tone children used when they had accepted something terrible because they had no choice. She forgot things sometimes, Thomas added softly. Important things like our names and where we lived and that she promised to come back. The casual way he said it made Sam's hands clench into fists, and he saw similar anger flash across Hartley's features. One of the deputies cleared his throat uncomfortably. Marshal, he said quietly, maybe we should focus on why we came here. The bank robbery, the wanted posters. Hartley held up a hand to silence him, his attention still focused on the twins with laser intensity. How long have you been with Sam? He asked them, and Lucy answered immediately. For days. He gave us real beds to sleep in and books to read, and he promised we could stay forever if we wanted to. The hope in her voice was so pure it hurt to hear, and Sam saw Hartley flinch slightly at the trust these children had placed in a wanted man. He's teaching me to read better, Thomas chimed in eagerly, and he's going to show me how to build things with wood. He said maybe I could help him make us our own bed, so we don't have to share. The excitement in the boy's voice made Sam's throat close up entirely. These children had been planning a future with him, building dreams around the safety he'd offered, and now he was about to lose them, just like they'd lost everyone else. Hartley stood slowly, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. He looked at Sam with an expression that might have been pity or anger or something more complicated than either. You know, I have to take you in, he said quietly. The law is the law regardless of your recent charitable works. I know, Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. He looked at Lucy and Thomas, trying to memorize their faces one more time. Just please make sure they're taken care of. They've been through enough. But Lucy wasn't having any of it. She marched across the room and planted herself directly between Sam and Hartley, her small frame trembling with righteous fury. You can't take him, she declared, her voice rising to a pitch that made every man in the room cease. He didn't do anything wrong. He saved us. Thomas joined her immediately, forming a human wall of childhood determination that would have been comical if it wasn't so heartbreaking. He's our family now, Thomas said firmly, his storm cloud eyes blazing with an intensity that reminded Sam painfully of his own stubborn streak. You can't just take away someone's family. That's not fair. The deputies exchanged uncomfortable glances, clearly unused to having their law enforcement activities questioned by people who barely came up to their waists. Hartley looked down at the children, then back at Sam, then at his men who were waiting for orders that seemed increasingly impossible to give. The silence stretched out like a held breath until finally the marshal spoke, his voice heavy with the weight of decisions that had no good outcomes. What exactly did you do in? He asked Sam. And there was something in his tone that suggested this wasn't just idle curiosity. The truth this time, no justifications, no excuses, just what happened. Sam felt the familiar weight of his past settling on his shoulders like a lead blanket. He glanced at the twins, who were watching him with identical expressions of trust and worry, and made a decision that felt both terrifying and inevitable. There was a bank, he said quietly, but it wasn't supposed to be a robbery. I was trying to get money to pay for my wife's medicine. She was dying of consumption, and the doctor and Helena said there was a new treatment, but it cost more than I made in 2 years. The words felt rusty in his mouth, like pieces of a story he tried to bury so deep they'd never see daylight again. The bank president laughed when I asked for a loan, said a ranch hand with no collateral wasn't worth the paper the forms were printed on. Sam's voice broke slightly. I went back that night, was just going to take what I needed from Mary's medicine, leave an IOU, pay it back when I could. Hartley's expression was unreadable, but it went wrong. Sam nodded, his throat tight with memories he'd spent 2 years trying to forget. Night watchman heard me. Started shooting before I could explain. I shot back. Didn't mean to kill him. Just wanted him to stop firing, but he fell and hit his head. And Sam stopped, unable to continue. And then more men came, Hartley said, finishing the story with the flat efficiency of someone who'd read the reports. 3 more dead before you got away with $1,500. The number hung in the air like an accusation. $1,500. For men's lives. Sam's wife had died anyway, 3 days before he made it back to her with the medicine that was supposed to save her. Lucy and Thomas were staring at him with wide eyes, processing this new information about the man they'd chosen to love. Sam waited for them to recoil, to realize that their rescuer was also a killer. But instead, Lucy just moved closer and slipped her small hand into his. "Were you trying to save someone?" she asked quietly, and the simple question cut straight to the heart of everything. Sam nodded, not trusting his voice. "Then you're still good," Lucy said with the absolute certainty that only children possessed. "Good people do bad things sometimes when they're trying to save the people they love." Thomas nodded beside her, his storm cloud eyes serious but unchanged in their trust. "Mama did bad things, too. When she was forgetting, he said softly. But we still loved her because we knew she was trying to be good." The acceptance in their voices made Sam's eyes burn with tears he couldn't shed. Hartley watched this exchange with growing fascination, like he was seeing something he'd never witnessed before. "The money," he said finally. "What happened to it?" Sam met his eyes directly. "Spent every penny on Mary's medicine and the doctor's bills. She died anyway, but at least I tried. Haven't touched a dollar that wasn't earned honest since then." "And the men you killed?" One of the deputies pressed, his hand still resting on his gun. "What about justice for them?" The question hung in the air like smoke from a dying fire. Sam looked at the twins holding on to him, like he was their anchor in a storm, and felt the weight of 4 ghosts settling on his shoulders. "I think about them every day," he said quietly. "Wonder if they had families, children, people who loved them and missed them when they didn't come home. I can't bring them back. Can't undo what I did. All I can do is try to live the rest of my life in a way that honors their memory." "By raising stolen children," the deputy asked sarcastically, and Sam felt Lucy's grip tighten on his hand. But before he could respond, Hartley's voice cut through the tension like a whip crack. "Enough." The marshal said sharply, his eyes blazing with sudden anger. "These children weren't stolen. They were abandoned and caged and rescued by someone who saw them suffering and chose to help." He looked at his deputies with an expression that made them both step back slightly. Any man who looks at these two and sees theft instead of salvation needs to examine his own conscience. The words hit the room like a physical blow. Sam stared at Hartley in shock, unable to believe what he was hearing. The marshal, who'd been hunting him across 3 states, was defending him, defending the choice to save Lucy and Thomas from Morrison's cage. But Hartley wasn't done. He turned back to Sam, his face a mask of conflicting emotions. "That doesn't change what you did in," he said quietly. 4 men are still dead. Money was still taken. The law still demands justice. Sam nodded, understanding flooding through him like cold water. For a moment, he'd allowed himself to hope that Hartley's sympathy for the children might extend to mercy for him. But justice and mercy were different things entirely. "I know," Sam said softly, looking down at Lucy and Thomas, who were clinging to him like he was their lifeline in a hurricane. "Just promise me they'll be safe. That's all I ask." But Lucy wasn't ready to give up. She looked up at Hartley with blazing eyes and spoke with the passionate intensity of someone fighting for everything that mattered. "If you take Sam away, what happens to us?" she demanded. "Do we go back to Mrs. Morrison's cage? Do we get sent to one of those places where children disappear and nobody remembers their names?" Her voice rose with each word until she was almost shouting. "Sam is the only person who ever chose to keep us. You can't just take that away." Thomas stepped forward beside his sister, his small jaw set in the stubborn line that meant he'd made up his mind about something important. "If you take Sam, you have to take us too," he said firmly. "We're a family now. Families stay together." The declaration hit the room like a thunderclap. Even the deputies seemed taken back by the fierce loyalty of these two small souls who were ready to follow a wanted man into whatever darkness awaited him. Hartley stared at the children for a long moment, something working behind his eyes that might have been calculation or compassion or both. Finally, he spoke, his voice careful and measured like a man walking across thin ice. "There might be another way," he said slowly, and Sam felt his heart stop beating entirely. The words hung in the air like a lifeline thrown to a drowning man. Sam felt his heart restart with a painful thud against his ribs, hope and disbelief wearing in his chest as he stared at Marshal Hartley. The lawman's face was carved from stone, but there was something in his eyes, a flicker of possibility that made Sam's knees weak with desperate relief. "Another way?" Sam asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Lucy and Thomas pressed closer to him, their small hands gripping his arms like they were afraid he might disappear if they let go. Around the room, the two deputies shifted uncomfortably, clearly uncertain about where their superiors' thoughts were leading. Hartley was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving between Sam and the children with the calculating expression of a man weighing options that all carried heavy costs. When he finally spoke, his voice was careful and measured like someone walking across ice that might crack at any moment. "The families of the men who died in," but he said slowly, "they don't want blood money or revenge trials. They want their breadwinners back, and since that's impossible, they want security for the futures their men can't provide anymore." He paused, letting the words settle. "The bank wants their money back with interest. The territorial government wants to see justice served and the books closed on a case that's been open too long." Sam nodded, though he couldn't see where this was leading. Justice was justice, and he'd made peace with paying whatever price the law demanded. But the marshal wasn't finished, and his next words made Sam's world tilt sideways. What if justice looked different than a hanging? Hartley asked quietly, "What if it looked like restitution, like a man spending the rest of his life making amends for what he took?" He gestured toward Lucy and Thomas, who were listening with the intense focus of children who understood that their entire future hung on whatever was being decided in this moment. "I've been watching you for 3 days," Hartley continued, his voice gaining strength as he spoke. "Watching how you are with these children, how they respond to you, how you've built something here that looks suspiciously like redemption." One of the deputies started to protest, but Hartley silenced him with a sharp look. "What are you saying?" Sam asked, afraid to hope, but unable to stop the emotion from creeping into his voice. Lucy squeezed his hand so tight her small fingers were going white, while Thomas stared at the marshal with storm-cloud eyes that seemed far too old for his young face. Hartley took a deep breath like a man about to jump off a cliff. "I'm saying that maybe justice looks like you working the rest of your life to pay back what you took with interest and penalties that'll keep you poor until the day you die. Maybe it looks like you raising these children who need a father more than the territory needs another corpse swinging from a rope." The silence that followed was so complete Sam could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. The possibility H. Hartley was offering seemed too good to be true, too much like mercy in a world that had shown precious little of it. But the marshal's face was serious, and there was something in his expression that suggested he'd been thinking about this longer than just the past few minutes. The conditions would be strict, Hartley continued, his voice taking on the official tone of someone laying out terms that couldn't be negotiated. You'd work under supervision. Every dollar you earn would be documented, and 70% of your wages would go toward restitution until the debt is paid. You'd report to me monthly, and any sign that you're reverting to your old ways would result in immediate arrest and hanging. Sam's throat was so tight he could barely speak. And the children, he managed to ask, though he was afraid of the answer. Everything Hartley was offering could be taken away in an instant if it didn't include Lucy and Thomas. The children stay with you, Hartley said firmly, and Sam felt his knees buckle with relief. Legal adoption papers properly filed, making them yours in the eyes of the law. But if you fail them, if you abandon them or harm them or prove yourself unfit as a father, they'll be removed from your custody permanently. Lucy let out a sound that was half sob, half laugh, and threw her arms around Sam's waist so hard she nearly knocked him over. Thomas joined her heartbeat later, both children crying with the overwhelmed relief of people who'd been holding their breath for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to breathe. But the deputies were not convinced. The younger one stepped forward, his hand resting on his gun, but his face carved from skepticism and disapproval. "Marshal," he said carefully, "this man is a wanted killer, bank robber, the law says. The law says justice must be served." Hartley interrupted sharply. "It doesn't dictate the form that justice has to take." His eyes blazed with an authority that made both deputies step back slightly. "I've been a marshal for 15 years, and I've seen enough hangings to know that sometimes a rope doesn't solve anything except creating more orphans and widows." He gestured toward Lucy and Thomas, who were still clinging to Sam like he was their anchor in a storm. "These children have already lost 2 parents. You want to take away the third one they found just to satisfy some abstract notion of proper punishment." The deputy's jaw worked silently, clearly struggling with orders that went against everything he'd been taught about law and order. But the president, the other deputy, protested. "If word gets out that killers can escape justice by adopting orphans," Hartley's laugh was sharp and humorless. "You think there's going to be a rush of bank robbers lining up to take on the financial burden of raising children, to work themselves into early graves, paying restitution while changing diapers and teaching lessons and staying awake with sick babies?" The question hung in the air, highlighting the absurdity of the concern. Raising children was hard work under the best of circumstances. Doing it while living under the constant scrutiny of the law and working to pay back a debt that would take decades to clear was hardly a path most criminals would choose. Sam found his voice finally, though it came out rough with emotions he couldn't contain. "Why?" he asked Hartley. "Why are you offering this? You've been hunting me for 2 years." The marshal was quiet for a long moment, his gaze distant, as if he was looking at something only he could see. "Because I have a daughter," Hartley said finally, his voice softer than Sam had ever heard it. "She's about Lucy's age with the same stubborn chin and fierce heart. And if something happened to me and my wife, if she ended up alone and scared and locked in a cage by someone who saw her as a burden instead of a blessing," he trailed off. But the meaning was clear. "You want someone to choose her," Sam said quietly, understanding flooding through him. "Someone to see her worth and fight for her future." Hartley nodded, his professional mask slipping enough to show the father underneath. "The men you killed in," but the marshal continued, his voice gaining strength. "2 of them had children, young ones. They know what it's like to have their world torn apart by violence and loss. When I contacted their families about this possibility, about a different kind of justice that might prevent other children from suffering the same fate." He paused, letting the implications settle. "They agreed?" Sam asked, hardly daring to believe it. Hartley nodded slowly. "They want the money you took with interest that'll keep you working for the next 20 years or more. But they also want something else. They want to know that their husbands' deaths led to something besides more death. They want to know that 2 orphan children found a father because of this whole terrible mess." The weight of that responsibility hit Sam like a physical blow. He would be raising Lucy and Thomas not just as his own children, but as living memorials to the men he'd killed. Every day would be a reminder of what his choices had cost. Every moment of joy with the twins would be shadowed by the knowledge that their happiness was built on tragedy. But looking down at their faces, Lucy's eyes bright with tears and hope. Thomas's storm cloud gazed steady with trust. Sam realized that maybe that was exactly what justice should look like. Not an ending, but a beginning. Not death balancing death, but life growing from the soil of sorrow. "What do I have to do?" he asked, his voice steady despite the emotions threatening to choke him. Hartley reached into his vest and pulled out a folded document, the papers crackling slightly as he opened them. "First, you sign this confession," the marshal said, his tone becoming businesslike again. "Full details of what happened but acknowledgement of guilt. Agreement to the terms of restitution. Then we ride into town and file the adoption papers for Lucy and Thomas properly legally, so there's never any question about where they belong." Sam took the papers with shaking hands, scanning the dense legal language that would bind him to this new life. 20 years of supervised labor, 70% of his wages going to the families of dead men, monthly reports to the territorial marshal, complete transparency about his finances, his activities, his fitness as a father. It was a prison sentence disguised as freedom, and Sam had never wanted anything more in his life. "There's one more thing," Hartley said quietly, his voice carrying new weight. "The bank but is willing to hire you. The president who laughed at your request for a loan wants to make you head of security, says there's nobody better qualified to protect his money than someone who knows exactly how it can be taken." The irony was so sharp it could cut glass. Sam looked up from the papers to find Hartley watching him with something that might have been approval. "He's offering you a house that goes with the job," the marshal continued. "Big enough for a family with a yard where children can play safely, good schools nearby, neighbors who don't need to know your history if you don't want them to." Lucy gasped, her eyes going wide with possibilities she'd never dared to imagine. Thomas tugged at Sam's sleeve, his voice small but excited. "A real house?" he asked. "With our own rooms and everything." Sam looked down at him. This boy who'd spent 3 weeks in a cage and was ready to be thrilled by the promise of walls and windows and a door that locked from the inside. "If you want it," Sam said softly, though his heart was already racing with the possibilities. Lucy was bouncing on her toes, unable to contain her excitement. "With books?" she asked eagerly. "And maybe a garden where we could grow vegetables like Mama used to." The casual mention of their mother hit Sam like a punch to the gut, reminding him that these children would always carry the ghosts of their losses alongside their hopes for the future. "With books and gardens, and anything else we can afford after we pay what we owe," Sam promised, and watched their faces light up like sunrise breaking over mountains. He turned back to Hartley, this man who'd hunted him across 3 states and was now offering him redemption wrapped in responsibility. "When do we leave?" Sam asked, his hand already reaching for the pen Hartley was offering. But before the marshal could answer, a sound outside made every man in the room freeze. The thunder of approaching hoof beats, too many horses moving too fast, and voices calling out with the urgent authority of men who'd been riding hard and weren't planning to stop for pleasantries. Through the window, Sam could see dust rising from the trail like smoke from a wildfire. Hartley's face went grim as he recognized the sound, and his hand moved instinctively toward his gun. Expecting company, the marshal asked tersely, but Sam was already shaking his head, his stomach dropping toward his boots as he realized their carefully negotiated future might be about to crumble before it had even begun. The riders burst into the clearing like a storm. 6 men on their horses, faces grim with purpose. Sam recognized Sheriff Coleman immediately, his usually friendly face carved from worry. Behind him rode Deputy Marshal Kane, flanked by federal agents whose badges caught morning light accusations. Lucy and Thomas pressed against Sam's sides, trembling with instinctive fear. Sam's hand moved protectively to their shoulders as possibilities raced through his mind, all ending with him in chains and the twins back in Morrison's cage. "Marshal Hartley," Coleman called out heavily. "Didn't expect to find you here." Kane dismounted slowly, cold eyes sweeping the cabin. "Telegraph from Helena," he said with satisfaction. "Governor's office has new orders." Seems there's been developments. What developments? Hartley asked carefully. Kane smiled like a snake. Bank robbery in Billings 3 months ago. Stage holdup outside Missoula. Seems our reformed family man has been busy. That's impossible, Sam said, shock thick in his voice. I've been here 2 years. Ask anyone. But Coleman's face was troubled, doubt creeping in. The descriptions match, Sam. And there was a witness who picked you out of photographs. Kane produced images, holding up one that made Sam's blood freeze. Him from 2 years ago, thinner, grief-marked, taken after Mary's funeral. We also have this, Kane said, producing a clinking bag. Silver dollars buried near your property matches the Billings robbery. Lucy stepped forward, chin raised despite streaming tears. You're wrong. Sam hasn't left us. He's been our papa every day. Thomas nodded fiercely. He reads us stories. Papas don't rob banks. Kane looked down condescendingly. Criminals are often kind when hiding from the law. Lucy shouted, trembling with rage. He saved us. You're the bad man trying to take our family. Sam knelt beside them, heartbreaking. Sometimes good people get accused wrongly, he said softly. But you didn't do it, Lucy said desperately. I didn't, Sam said steadily. I swear on your lives I haven't committed a crime since, but Kane gestured to his agents. Samuel Briggs, you're under arrest. The twins threw themselves at Sam, clinging desperately. Please don't take him, Lucy sobbed. He's all we have. We'll be alone again back in the cage. Lucy ran to Hartley, throwing herself at his legs with desperate eyes. You said we could be a family. You promised we could stay together. Thomas joined her, both clinging to the marshal who'd offered hope moments before. Please don't let them take our papa, Thomas whispered. Families stay together. Hartley looked down, wrestling with impossible decisions. I'm sorry, he said quietly. The law is the law. Lucy planted herself between Sam and the agents, trembling with fury. Then your law is stupid, she shouted across the canyon. Your law takes children from people who love them. If that's justice, then justice is wrong. In the absolute silence that followed, Sheriff Coleman stepped forward. You know what? The child got a point. Kane's eyes narrowed, but Coleman's voice gained strength. I've known Sam 2 years. Evidence can be planted. Photos manipulated. What are you suggesting? Hartley asked. Coleman looked around the room. Maybe we've got the wrong man. Maybe we should investigate who else had access to Samuel Briggs' photograph. Mrs. Morrison, Sam said suddenly. She knew my past had access to the boarding house. She could have learned enough to frame me. Coleman nodded eagerly. Morrison struggling financially. What if someone paid her? Lucy looked up at Sam with blazing faith. See, I told you were innocent. Hartley looked at Kane, then Coleman, then Sam and the children holding each other like shipwreck survivors. We investigate, he said firmly. Before any arrests, before separating families, we investigate everything until we have unquestionable proof. Samuel Briggs stays with his children. Kane's face purple-led, but Hartley cut him off. 2 weeks. We investigate for 2 weeks. Sam pulled the twins into his arms, tears of relief streaming down his face. 2 weeks to prove love was stronger than evidence. 2 weeks, Lucy whispered, bright with hope. That's enough time, isn't it, Papa? Sam looked into her eyes, windows to a soul that chose to love him despite everything. Yeah, sweetheart, he whispered back. That's enough time.